Section 2. Individualistic Law. Note: this is not intended to be a document on law. Therefore, the following points are only briefly discussed, insofar as to impress the individualistic philosophy of the subject reasonably upon the mind. Law defined. Defined by the Cognitive Science Laboratory at Princeton University. 1. Legal document setting forth rules governing a particular kind of activity. 2. The collection of rules imposed by authority. Defined by Wikipedia. Law, a loan word from Old Norse lag. In politics and jurisprudence, is a set of rules or norms of conduct which mandate, prescribe, or permit specified relationships among people and organizations, provide methods for ensuring the impartial treatment of such people, and provide punishments for those who do not follow the established rules of conduct. Defined by the American Heritage Dictionary. 1. A rule established by authority, society, or custom. 2. The body of rules governing the affairs of man within a community or among states, social order. 3. A set of rules or customs governing a discrete field or activity. All of the above definitions use the word rule to define law. Therefore, rule must be defined. Rule defined. 1. A principle or condition that customarily governs behavior. 2. A prescribed guide for conduct or action. The Cognitive Science Laboratory at Princeton University. From the American Heritage Dictionary. 1. An authoritative direction for conduct or procedure, specifically, A. One of the regulations governing procedure in a legislative body. B. The principal method of conduct observed by the members of a group. The above definitions describe principles of conduct agreed to and followed by a group. The question that comes into play is, who creates the principles? Sticking strictly to the above definitions, we see that either custom or authority creates them. As far as custom goes, the reasoning for some customs is not always clear, so it is not worthwhile to argue customs here. However, authority is an alarming word. If the authority is the masses of a non-corrupt direct democracy of the people, then the laws reflect exactly what the people believe and are therefore noble. But if the authority is an entity separate from the people and removed from their true wishes, then the principles erected thereby are not noble. They become simply mechanisms of control. Mechanisms of control can be successfully undermined with simplicity. Complexity in law is directly proportionate to its corruption, ineffectiveness, and use as a controlling mechanism. From antiquity, the systems of law were very simple until relatively recently. Only in the last 2,000 years has law compounded rapidly to its ridiculous modern form. Egypt survived thousands of years with a mere 42 principles which could easily be memorized by all citizens. As time progressed, laws became more complex, and it is not because society became more complex, as will be described. Has the vast amount of species of animals living in harmony for millions of years across the globe required countless weighty books of endless stipulations? Complexity in law is only due to deceit and/or ignorance. The fact that such a civilization as Egypt lasted for thousands of years on 42 simple principles is further proof that complexity and sophistication are unnecessary elements for harmony and longevity of a civilization. The basic underlying principles of the Egyptian laws below are waste and harm, and waste could be viewed as a further emanation of harm, the source of all social problems. As history progressed, laws developed to describe the various ways one can harm another and the degree or severity of that harm, thereby moving away from describing the source of these problems. This is where a madness began to develop, because there is an infinite range of manifestation of harm and degrees of the same which man can inflict upon his fellow. Man could not create enough paper and ink to record each type of incident, let alone their respective punishments. This madness causes law to compound and become increasingly complex at a recursive rate, confounding all those beneath it while benefiting the few who are aware of its proliferate nonsense, yet consciously allow its continuance and alter it to their benefit, a practice which becomes increasingly easy with increasing complexity. The root of this madness is none other than the act of describing the misdeed instead of describing the source of the problem, which is the flaw in character that has initially produced the misdeed. By comparing the Egyptians' source-oriented code to those misdeed-oriented codes which come later, one will clearly see how the understanding of the source of the problems becomes lost, and maniacal focus upon the infinite manifestation of misdeeds becomes the dominant mode of thought persisting to this day. The misunderstanding was handed down generation after generation, and the systems, like a cancer, grow at an exponential rate towards future systems of infinite madness. The older, simpler systems of law had long lifespans, while the modern, more complex systems have shorter lifespans. Thus, complexity also correlates to shortened lifespan and instability, as opposed to simplicity having a longer lifespan and stability. Even though they begin to deviate from source-oriented thinking and descend into the psychosis of infinite misdeeds, the Code of Hammurabi, 1700 BC, and the 12 Tablets of Rome, 449 BC to 201 BC, were both displayed publicly so that every citizen knew the law. They were both small enough to commit to memory. In fact, the 12 tables were written in rhyming verse to facilitate memorization. It was authoritarian powers who hid the laws from the people, thus making the law unknown and causing inequality of punishments, such as with the early patricians to the plebeians, a section of history repeating itself at this moment. Any code of law with more laws than can be memorized easily by each person is unnecessarily complex for the sheer purpose of controlling individuals with false freedoms and leveraging other individuals with legislature. The growth rate of this madness has become so fast that today new laws are made each day and change so fast that few can keep track, that is, if they even know of their existence in the first place. This is absurd. Most laws of today are merely designed by one corporation's lawyer to bind up the competition until they can either find a loophole, amend the law, or get a new one passed. This is a blatant attempt at binding one's brethren and creating a psychotic compounding complexity impossible for any one man to keep track of without making it a life's practice. It is a direct impediment to the simple and rapid evolution of mankind. Modern law has become naught but a playground of iniquity, smothering any noble idea of truth and justice. For these reasons, the individualist focuses only on the concept of harm, the very root of all misdeed. How then does one deter this? The individualists find the simple solution in their concept of divinity. If there is only one being, and all are but subdivisions of this one consciousness, then to do harm to anything is to do harm to the only self, the one, thus oneself. This concept is taught from birth repeatedly to assist the uprooting of the source of harm. When the unity of all creatures is fully taught and understood, few will initially do wrong because they realize to harm another is to simply harm themselves. The remaining misdeeds committed will be the acts of either the desperate or the deliberate. This concept of harm, as any concept, can be twisted by the depraved. Balance must be maintained throughout the material life. To harm nothing is ideal, yet this world is not ideal. Therefore, in such a case as an invading army, one of this nature might say that the precept is broken by causing harm in defense, or a plague of animals comes to the point of disrupting harmony, thus eliminating them for protection is also considered harm, but it too is in defense. The individualist observes nature and sees that animals attack to either defend themselves or in desperation, hunger. Man's mind should be sufficient to keep himself from desperation, leaving only defense as man's means of harm, besides deliberate. Defense from humans in an ideal world would never be needed, for all would be practicing the same principle. But again, this world is not ideal. Therefore, the individualist master self-defense and simultaneously pray it will never need to be used. By this method, it is ensured that this concept of harm will never be used to pacify a nation, leaving them weak and defenseless for any invading army to easily crush. There also must be mentioned the incident of abstract harm, the stuff in the minds of weaklings. These are such things as insults and offense taken from another's action. Again, ideally, the individualist is beyond these trivial things and does not engage in this conduct nor consider them a form of harm. One's personal actions or comments, while possibly offensive to others, simply displays one's level of evolution and one's grasp of individualistic thought. Thus, the one who purposely sets out to offend succeeds in only being recognized as an ignorant fool. There can be no punishment or monetary reward for such childish actions or complaints. A. The 42 Principles. The individualists understand that simplicity is the watchword and uphold 42 simple self-governing principles. They are aware that the ancients knew truth and how simple it is to love each other and live in peace and harmony. They are ever watchful for the twofold enemy who attacks this light, the learned evil and the ignorant deceived by the learned evil. They who attempt to convince man that it is foolishness to believe that life is in fact simple and easy to live. These 42 principles are arguably as old as dynastic Egypt, 3100 BC or possibly far older. Scholars agree that they can definitely be found in texts dated 2600 to 2000 BC or older, and are found compiled neatly in the Papyrus of Ani dating 1240 BC. Egypt and its antiquity have always been subjects of great debate. For sound reasons, the individualists believe that these moral laws were followed by the Egyptians prior to dynastic Egypt, but settle on the date of 3150 BC as being the date at which these principles were actually organized into a formal belief law system. Therefore, these 42 principles of Ma'at, justice, predate the Code of Hammurabi by about 1450 years, the Ten Commandments by about 1850 years, and the 12 Tablets by 2700 years, and were practiced while all these other systems were practiced until about 31 BC. The 42 principles are displayed below so all can see the simple yet powerful beliefs of the individualists. In the original code, the 42 affirmations are written in past tense as I have not, because they are declared to judges after one dies and enters into the afterlife. They are written here as affirmations of one's present incarnation. For over 3,000 years, this very simple code of laws upheld arguably the longest lasting human civilization ever known, with India and China following. Contrast this with the modern United States law, composed of hundreds of pages in a society a mere 231 years old, already on the verge of collapse from corruption and materialism. It seems to show a great error in thought, even an insanity. Note, some new evidence may date Egypt much further back in antiquity, making it even much more successful and undisputedly the longest lived civilization.